Hello everyone and welcome back to the breakdown. Today I'm going to be talking about how much RAM you need for your Minecraft server. We're going to be going over vanilla servers with like no plugins or anything. We're going to be going over plugin based servers like Bukkit, Spigot, and Paper servers, and we're going to be going over modded servers like a Forge server running a mod pack and things like that. I'm going to be going over it all in this video. Every single type of server that you have, we're going to be going over it in this video, so be sure to stick around for that. But first, we have a message from our sponsor, which is Apex Minecraft Hosting. If you go to the first link down below, thebreakdown.xyz/Apex, you can get an incredible 24-hour DNOS protected Minecraft server for you and your friends. We actually love Apex so much that we host our own server on them, play.breakdowncraft.com. So if you are looking for an incredible Minecraft server, Apex Minecraft Hosting is the place to go. Again, you can check them out at the first link down below, thebreakdown.xyz/Apex, to get a Forge, Bukkit, Paper, Spigot, or vanilla Minecraft server set up in just a few clicks. But if you get a server with Apex, you're still going to need to know how much RAM that server needs, and that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. We're going to be going over how much RAM your server needs for 10 players, 20 plugins, 100 plugins, 100 players. We're going to be going over it all in this video, so let's go ahead and jump on into it. So first and foremost, for every 10 players that your Minecraft server has, you're going to need about 1 GB of RAM, which means 100 MB of RAM for every player on your server. Now, this is kind of on the high end, you know. Usually most players will use around 60 to 75 megabytes of RAM. But I always say more is better. Go a little higher. That way if someone does use 100 or someone just blows up and uses 200 megabytes of RAM for a little while, guess what? That's perfectly fine because you've got that buffer built in for that, you know, difference. So that's why I always say 100 megabytes of RAM per player for a vanilla or a Bukkit, Spigot, plugin based server, right? So for example, if you had a 10 player server, you would want a gigabyte of RAM for those players. Now, one thing that I will say is Minecraft itself is also using about 250 megabytes to 500 megabytes of RAM, depending on what you're running. A vanilla Minecraft server is going to be using about 500 megabytes of RAM just to run. And then you'll need to add another, you know, your RAM for players, 100 megabytes per player on top of that. However, if let's say you're running a Paper server, Paper can just use like 250 megabytes of RAM to just run the server, and then you need to add about 100 megabytes of RAM per player on top of that. So I would recommend running all of your servers on Paper, even if you're not running any plugins. Just don't install plugins and it'll basically be a vanilla server, but you'll get the benefits of running Paper on your server and using less RAM. So basically a Minecraft server is going to use 500 megabytes of RAM for a vanilla server or 250 megabytes of RAM for a Paper-based server. Modded servers are about the same as vanilla, somewhere between 500 megabytes to 750 megabytes. I would assume 500 and you're going to be perfectly fine with modded servers as well as vanilla servers. And again, Paper is running in there at 250 megabytes. Spigot and Bukkit are somewhere in the middle, between 250 and 500. So now you know how much RAM per player, 100 megabytes per player, and you know how much RAM just a Minecraft server is going to use just sitting there basically doing nothing other than just running the server. What about plugins though? Plugins are something that pretty much every server needs and wants, and I mean, every major server out there has plugins. Our server, play.breakdowncraft.com, has hundreds of plugins. So what do you do with plugins? Because plugins use RAM. Well, for plugins, I would recommend 1 gigabyte of RAM for every 20 plugins you add to your server. That's just a general rule of thumb. Some may use more than that. Some may use less. But on average, 1 gigabyte of RAM should be plenty for 20 plugins and keep you running well into the future. For example, if you have 20 plugins on your server, you have 10 players on your server, you're going to need somewhere around 2 gigabytes of RAM. Basically, 1 gigabyte for the plugins, 1 gigabyte for the players, and then if you wanted to throw another half gigabyte or so on there for just the server processes, that would be fine. But we're building in enough buffer here to where you don't necessarily have to have that, right? That's kind of the goal. You want to have more RAM than not enough RAM. You don't want your server to just run out of RAM and be saying, can't keep up, and the server's lagging all the time and all that stuff. You don't want that. So that is why I always say build in some buffer, and that's what we're doing with these numbers. And because of that, you really don't necessarily have to factor in the fact that, you know, the Minecraft server is using 250 to 500 megabytes of RAM by just sitting idle. However, I would recommend doing it just in case because you want more than enough because you don't ever run out. So basically 10 players, 1 gigabyte of RAM, 20 plugins, 1 gigabyte of RAM. That server combined would be 2 gigabytes of RAM for 10 players and 20 plugins. So that's basically how servers with plugins work, with Bukkit, Spigot, Paper, all that stuff. But the modded realm of things, it gets a little different, and that's because mods use a lot more RAM per player, and they also use quite a bit of RAM just to run themselves. So when you're running a Forge server for a mod pack or something like that, you're going to need significantly more RAM than if you're running the same server with all the same features using plugins. That's just because of how they're coded differently and everything like that. Plugins are built for a multiplayer environment. Most mods are built for a single player environment, so they don't mix as well with servers, so they eat more RAM. So because of that, a modded server is going to use about 150 megabytes of RAM per player. So 50 more megabytes than a vanilla server. And again, it's probably going to be more like 75 to 125, but if you still have 150 megabytes of RAM per player for your modded server, you're going to be perfectly fine. So for 10 players, you would need 1.5 gigabytes of RAM. Now, what about mods? This is where it gets kind of interesting because mods are pretty resource intensive when it comes to using RAM. And this is true outside and on servers. So for example, if you play in single player, you're going to use a lot more RAM with modded Minecraft than in vanilla Minecraft with no mods. Same thing here with mods on a Minecraft server. So for mods, you need about 30 megabytes of RAM per mod. So for example, if you're running 100 mods, which isn't uncommon for a mod pack, you're going to need about 3 gigabytes of RAM for that mod pack. Then if you want to have 10 players on that server, you're going to need 1.5 gigabytes for all 10 players. So that combined total is 4.5 gigabytes of RAM to run your Minecraft server and basically have everything on the up and up and good to go and all of that stuff. So overall, a modded server running 100 mods with 10 players online would need 4.5 gigabytes of RAM to be safe. You can also add in a buffer there if you wanted to of maybe 5 gigabytes of RAM just to be safe. Mods are very resource intensive when it comes to RAM. They just need it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, whereas, plugins are much more optimized. That's why all of the big network servers from play.breakdowncraft.com to Hypixel are using plugins, not mods, because plugins are just way more efficient, use a lot less RAM, and they use a lot less CPU power. And that's actually the next side of Minecraft server lag, and that's making sure you have a good CPU that you're running your server on. Luckily, most hosts out there, like Apex Minecraft Hosting, have pretty good server power and pretty good server processors running on their servers, and that means you're not going to have to really worry about that there. RAM is your biggest focus on these, and that's why most of them dedicate their packages per RAM and not per processor. But nevertheless, that is how much RAM you need for your server. If you're running a plugin-based server, you need 100 megabytes of RAM per player, and then 1 gigabyte of RAM for every 20 plugins you have. On a modded server, for every 100 mods you have on your server, you're going to need about 3 gigabytes of RAM, and then you're going to need 150 megabytes of RAM per player who is going to be playing on your server. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And by the way, all these player numbers are like actively playing on your server. So for example, if you have like 10,000 players joining, you don't need that much RAM. You just need that for the amount of active players. So 10 people playing on your server at the same time is going to require 100 megabytes of RAM per player. When those players are offline, that's fine. They're not using any RAM. But nevertheless, that's how much RAM you need for your Minecraft server. If you have any questions, let us know in the comment section down below, and give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We post incredible Minecraft videos every single day of the week. Thank you all so much for watching. My name is Nick. Come play with us on play.breakdowncraft.com. We've got custom survival. We've got custom skyblock. You will absolutely love it. And I am out. Peace.